And you will certainly feel that as you, I know, it's embarrassing.
Nonetheless true.
You know,
It is. Maybe she doesn't know it.
I'm not going to tell you, you can read all the bios in your packet, so we have not focused on just reading your people's bios to you. But I do want you to know that Peggy grew up on a cotton farm in South Texas. She has actually picked cotton, y'all. And so, so she, last night, these stories really resonated with her about hard times. And but Peggy left Texas and went on her great journey of her mythic life that she has lived. Peggy is a woman whose heart is wide open, and I think that's probably one of her great spiritual disciplines, is to have that, I imagine unzipping my shirt to open my heart. But she also has a mind wide open. It's amazing how her mind is so wide open to learning all the time. And she's traveled the world with Jim Houston and worked in many cultures with many people and met people all over the world. We always try to categorize people, so my new thing is that there are 3 categories of people. There are people who are generous with their resources, their money. They'll write you a check, just don't bother me, here's my donation. And when Richard Gere first came to Colquitt, I told him, people in Colquitt will give you their time a lot quicker than they will their money. We found that out. And so there are people, like you saw last night, those people last night had performed all last weekend, came down here Monday night and rehearsed this show to present it to you. So they're very generous with their time. And then there are people who are generous of spirit. And Peggy Rubin exemplifies a person who is all 3 of these, her great generosity of spirit. So I invite you to be in the light that is Peggy Rubin.
Those wonderful things. It's because I know people like her. That's been the great gift. The people that I have met and learned from and watched and yearned to be like and wanted to come and visit. I've been wanting to be here. It's 20 years now since you first started. So it's a great joy to be here. Thank you. And thank you. It is an enormous honor to have a chance to stand here before you and all these incredible people that you have caused to come to this creative community building adventure. There is one of my favorite stories is this one. It's told by Elie Wiesel. When misfortune confronted the Jews, the great rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, would go to a sacred place in the forest. He would light the fire with appropriate ceremony, and he would say the prayers. And the misfortune was averted. Some generations later, the great rabbi, when misfortune faced the Jews, said, I have forgotten the place in the forest. I do not know how to light the fire. But Master of the universe, I do know the prayers. And that must be sufficient. And it was sufficient. Misfortune was averted. And generations later, when misfortune faced the people, the great rabbi sat in his room and said, Master of the universe, I do not know the place in the forest. I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayers. All I can do is tell the story. And that must be sufficient. And it was. And Wiesel concludes the story with, God made man because he loved stories. A smiling, joyous God sitting in this room last night and sitting with us today in anticipation of and in the embrace of the telling of the story. And I'm going to ask you a question. It is the theater's job to ask the great questions, the terrifying questions, the ones that we cannot answer, except, as the great poet advises us, as we lean into them and live the questions. But the question comes from Mary Oliver, a glorious poet. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Woo! What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And so that's the question of the day, the question of the year, the question of the lifetime. What is it you plan to do with this wild and precious life? I have a suggestion. In the middle of all the other wondrous things you do, all of the work, in the middle of, in between, woven through and around and about, I have a suggestion. And that suggestion is that you play your life as a work of improvisatory, sacred theater for all it's worth. How does that sound? In the middle of everything else, you play with the same delight and gusto. You remember last night? Those kids on the train? That's us. We're on the train. Who's going to jump off? Who's going to ride it all the way through? Who's going to let the lights come out so you don't know how it ends? That's what we're doing. We're on that adventure train, and we want to play it with all of the energy and devotion and excitement and joy that we can engender in ourselves and in others. That's part of the great joy, is to watch others fall in love with something. So, and my teaching, what I have to offer, and I called it Sacred Theater Meets Swamp Gravy. Actually, what it was, of course, was a recognition that swamp gravy is the essence of sacred theater. And I want to go through what I call the powers of sacred theater, which are really the powers of the traditional theater, but we are, I want to amp them up a bit because I want to dedicate them to the sacred. And that amps up their power the moment you do that. And what I want to also emphasize is that when I'm talking of power, I mean as something that you engage. It's not a dictum, it's not a suggestion, although I termed it as a suggestion. It is a power, and it wants to be embraced. And I'm going to go through there are 9 of them, as I believe or understand, and I'm going to go through them and ask you to think about where you are and what you do with each of them, because each of you, I know, is potently engaged in this great enactment of the life on earth story. The best story there is. The first of the powers. Oh, I know. We'll do it like it's a journalism class. We've got some journalists here. I don't know whether you taught today what I was taught, but we'll pretend. Okay. The first question in any good story is, who? Who? Okay. So the answer to that is you. And the answer to the question, who, is you in this incarnation, this body. I've always loved the word incarnation because it means in meat. You're in flesh, in flesh, in flesh. And that's a very precious and delicate thing, as I know most of you know. Anybody who's getting anywhere near my age knows how precious and delicate the flesh is. And those of you who are young know how precious and delicate the flesh is. So it's a wondrous thing, the whole power of the spirit and soul within a body, and a human body. Most of us, some of us are dogs and horses, but part that anyway, or cats, but human body. And I believe that we are all here for a purpose that we get to live into as we move the great journey forward. And I take for my inspiration the writings of a very great poet of 3,000 to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, we don't know. But his sense of the reasons for our incarnation are three, that most of us follow one of these tracks. This is a track story, okay? A study track. And one of them is the great path of service. And since I wrote the book, I have come to a little glitch, or a little further thing on it. I believe that we're all here in love. And so one of the great paths would be to fall in love with the world and everything in it in such a way that you want to serve it. And serve it with everything you know, everything you have, everything you can. And I know there are people in this room for whom that is true. Is there anybody willing to stand and say, my way is the way of love through service? Thank you. Thank you. Oh, how beautiful. Yes! Yes! No, don't sit down yet. Don't sit down yet. Don't sit down yet. If you will. If you just pause for a moment to think of a gesture, perhaps, that would demonstrate the way you love through service. Just think of what your hands might want to do. Thank you, Dorothy. I like that. Yes. Yes, and all is well. The great teachers, you know, the wondrous ones who serve in love for the world. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the next great track is the ones who fall in love with learning. Now you can stand more than once. The ones who are in love with learning and who go what is called the path of wisdom, or you want just to know more and more and more and more, and so you search your life for wisdom, or for just, I need to know a little bit more about that. The scientists, I think, are in love with learning, and the urban scientists are in love with learning. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Please stand if yours is the way of our desire to know. Yes. Oh, beautiful. Now, if you would just ask your body, we can all fall and be alligators and ask your body for a form of gesture that would demonstrate that yearning for learning, that quest for wisdom. Yes. Oh, the listener. Lovely. Thank you. Yeah. The seeker. Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. And yes, bringing it in. Beautiful. Oh, I love the listeners. Wonderful. Yeah, and the service through the learning, right? You offer it after you know it. Whoa, my, what a wondrous group of people. Okay, thank you. And in the great poem, the person who is telling this tale happens to be a god. And so he says the best way is to fall in love with God. Okay? The path of devotion to the deity, to all that is. And so, all of you in love with God, would you please? And that is your way of being in the world. Is to all right. So you know what you're doing here, right?
Right.
You know what you're here to do. And I want to ask you to think about it all in terms of active verbs. So if you're here to love God, I cherish, I adore, I worship, I fall on the ground in wonder and delight. All of those lovely verbs of what you do, and every moment is a verb-filled action, like a good theater piece. So that's the way we want to build our lives on active verbs. And so we follow those verbs into this vast and gorgeous place of loving God. And would you now just let your body wiggle a little bit, everybody wiggle a little bit, and see if you can, if something comes to your heart that says, I am in love with God, and this is how I am in the world, and why I am in the world. Beautiful. Yes, and just present. Yeah. Oh, lovely. Thank you all. Thank you all. So those are the 3 big tracks for life that a very great and wise person of many thousands of years ago suggested or outlined in a very helpful way about how to be in the world, why you have come, why you are here in this place and in this time, what has called you here. And there's also a very important piece that I believe is important in any endeavor, is to dedicate it. We use a weaker word when we talk about intention. I intend. But I think it is stronger if we actually dedicate the life, dedicate this day's activity to something bigger than we are. And certainly if you've been called to this conference, you're working with something bigger than your own life. Is that not so? So the request then is to think a moment about how you would dedicate your track this day. Has anyone got a word they'd be willing to share what you're dedicating the day to? Yes.
Envision redemption. Envision redemption.
Well, we don't have knees on that one. Inventing redemption.
No, envision redemption.
Invention.
Envision.
I'm sorry. You get to be the station is terrible on your ears. Envisioning.
Envision redemption.
Oh, sweetheart.
Wow.
We can all do that. Thank you. Thank you. That it is a palpable presence in your life and in the lives of those around you. That sense of the redeemed. Is that fair? Thank you. Yes. Change. Oh boy, that's a tough one. Change, yes. Dedicating it to change. And that's a full engagement of your mind, your body, your heart, your soul, everything. We can't avoid it. I mean, it's hanging around whether we like it or not. But it is certainly a powerful thing to embrace it and to intend it. You know, amps up the energy on it quite a bit. So thank you for that courage.
Reconciliation.
Oh, lovely. Reconciliation. Reconciling the pieces of yourself to yourself. Reconciling the pieces of society that are broken away. So, that's a beauty. And there's such an engendering place of peace within it. Something rich and potent has happened. That the angst and anxiety, anguish and sorrow of the world is somehow brought to a place where people can breathe again. Does that make sense for them? Thank you. Beautiful. Did you have
Anticipation.
Anticipation. All right. Let's dedicate to that. Okay, now I'm going to move on. Lord have mercy. I could talk all day. So, listen, thank you for the intention and to hold that with the norm or the dedication to hold that with your verb for the day. So the second question that a good journalist asks is, the first one is who, and you got the answer to that, right? You. And who, and the second one that I was taught was what. What, okay? Who, what? Well, I believe we're here as sacred players on this sacred earth to enact a great story. Yeah! We're here to tell a story, to live our story, to embrace a story, to demonstrate a story, to carry a story, to tell a story, to live a story. And that's why we're actors, because we're doing it, right? We're not standing here as narrators. It's like the people last night. They weren't narrating a story. They were doing the story. Right, demonstrating it by being it. So, and there are so many glorious stories. How many did we see last night? What kinds of stories did we hear last night? Did we hear any about redemption? Yes, exactly. How about reconciliation? Huh? Beautiful. Did we hear any love stories? Did we hear... we drink a little, did you pink them today? we saw... One of the things that struck me over and over is we saw over and over heroic action. Day after day after day of heroic action. Of that merciless, endless, hard work that our ancestors and not so many ancestors ago all did day after day after day on the earth. Around the earth. We heard some terrible stories, some stories of great anguish. And the thing that I want to acknowledge about that when the story is put up for others to ask the questions, to receive the story, and to ask the questions that are born from that story, then something is redeemed. And it is a mystery, and it can be very subtle. But I believe that as the people in Swamp Gravy tell or enact those stories, as we enact stories that change the story of the earth, that something potent is redeemed. Even if they just have had a chance to be heard again, or to be understood at a different level. Something shifts in the subtle worlds. And I believe it is, as that wonderful story of the neighbors and this part of that mural, that's the mural, right? Mm-hmm. That just, when I first saw it, I was so touched. And then I was so glad to hear the story last night. That God is smiling. No matter what the story, and no matter how terrifying and terrible the story may seem to be, the telling of it releases something, and the enacting of it releases even more energy. So we're in a very potent time and a very potent situation where we are alive to our own stories, and we are willing to listen to and embrace the stories of our cities, our plans, our desires, our hopes, our visions. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to play the play, okay? And you get to play all the stories. That's one of the nice things. Alligators and humans and everything else. You get to play them all, sometimes in the course of a very lucky lifetime. One of the other questions that the great journalist will ask, we got who and what, and then when? When? Okay. Anybody got an answer?
Now.
Yeah. Good work. Good work. You notice that in the theater it is always now. Last night, even though the implication might have been there were never the words once upon a time. It was once upon a right now. Okay? What I want to talk about right now, the power of now, is that it holds within it everything that has gone before. Everything that has gone before. And because it holds everything that has gone before, it also holds a benediction, a blessing, and a dedication to the future. With the power of now, when you are present in this moment, knowing all that you know, all that you have lived, and all your ancestors have lived, you are blessing the future if you stand in the moment now with that reality. I'm going to ask Karen if she'll tell a story that she told me yesterday about the power of now. The little girl, the young woman who turns 15. Because it absolutely demonstrates a really important piece about the power of now. If I forget it after she has told the story, because I'm so moved by the story, will you remind me to tell you? Do my preaching.
We had the opportunity to do a consultancy in El Paso, Texas, and there were several of us there, and we were gathering stories. And this beautiful woman, about 40 years old, was telling her story. And in the Hispanic culture, when you turn 15 for a young woman, that's a very important time. And so normally the family, you get a beautiful gown, you wear high heels maybe for the first time, you wear makeup for the first time. And it's just a very special birthday, your 15th birthday. Well, this woman was telling the story, and she said that her family was very poor. So she had never even dreamed of having her 15th birthday. And Charlotte was there when this happened. And in the midst of it, she was, she started crying because there was just no hope for having this. Well, the day of her 15th birthday, she came home from school, and there lying on her bed was a beautiful dress and the high heel shoes. And her aunts and her cousins and her mother were there, and they fixed her hair and helped her put on her makeup. And as she was telling this story, it's like she was transformed into that 15-year-old girl. And she got all dressed, and then she went to her aunt and uncle's house, and there was her family and her friends with this huge table of food and a cake. And she was in the now. She was there once again. She was 15 years old. And it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I think I saw then the power of story in that experience.
Thank you. Really the beautiful thing, and just notice that as Karen told the story, did you see a change in her? Yeah. Did she not become even more beautiful as she told the story? And you can imagine how the woman who was in her 40s, when she remembered herself in that moment, surrounded by the love of her family, all of it, who had gone together quietly to give her this great gift. In that moment, she was there again. And my question and my desire, my wish for you, is that you would find those moments in your own life that are so precious and so filled with redemption, that you live in them, and that you bring them to this moment. The great spiritual teachers tell us to remember and be present in our moments of profound happiness and success, or whatever memory comes, or whatever memory is there, to hold that alive so thoroughly within you that it's here now. And did you feel the gift of Karen's telling? Did you feel anything when you heard that? Right. So you see how that transforms, or how that moves. If you are in the moment of your grandest, happiest success, and you know it is within you, and you stand within that, even though right now you're, oh Lord, taking notes and all that. Something happens not just to you, but to the world. To the world around you. I promise. And I never tell a lie.
Just a story.
It's just a story. Thank you for reminding me. So, live in the power of now, embracing all brought you to this place. And if you don't think you have any, make some up. That's what the theater can do for you. All right, so we have when, who, what, when. Now we're going to where. All right. The great stage of life. This profound and precious place. This is where we are. And our work as sacred players is to tell the story of this wondrous earth. Peanuts, cotton, corn, trees. What are the other stories of the beings of this earth? Stand on this earth that we share with. Dolphins.
Alligators.
Alligators, yes.
Birds. Mussels.
Trees. And I believe that the theater in its subtlest sense, I want you to know that I believe, now I might be crazy, but I believe that because our kind gentleman was such an elegant alligator, that all the alligators in the world suddenly stood up and said, hey, that's kind of nice. Thanks for that. I think so that's why, that's another thing that happens when we enact or when we tell the story. That something wonderful happens in the whole world. Something shivers and shakes and says, thank you. So we're on the great stage, the holiest stage, and we want to honor it. We want to embrace the power of place. Would you pause now? This is a beautiful ceremony that they do on the maraes in New Zealand. And when visitors arrive at these Maori settlements, there's this wonderful thing that happens. All the women in the place where they live begin to cry this strange, poignant, because they're already sad that you're leaving. Even, you know, that's their way of welcoming. And then when you leave, they do the welcome song. So it's a lovely little turnabout. So they're already being sad, so then they can be happy while you're there. And then, anyway, it's a lovely. They, you know, it's the other hemisphere. They do things. But one of the things that the visitors do, they sit and bring their energy into alignment with that place. And what they do is stand and tell the valleys, the rivers, the trees, the stories, all of it that they come from. So would you pause for just a moment, or maybe longer, and really sense where you were born? What were the mountains, or the hills, or the plains, or the crops, or the trees, or the valleys, or the rivers, where you were born? And just honor that. Just honor that. And say thank you for that piece of the earth that you carry with you. The water in your blood, your whole body, was formed by the water of the place where you were born. And when I was reading Karen's wonderful book about Colquitt, I thought, it is in the water. What happens here is in the water. And that we carry that water all our lives. So we really want to honor that place. Anybody want to name a mountain or a valley or a hill? I come from the plains of South Texas. I mean, and flat.
The Golden Isles.
Ah.
I was born in West Virginia, and on a little road that's called Limestone. And then we've lived other places, Michigan, Maryland, and now I live on Big Ugly. But 2 years ago, they changed my address to Limestone, and I live within 4 miles of where I was. Full circle.
It is a lovely life, isn't it? Yeah. Your holy stage. Your holy stage. the place where your play takes place. Anyone else going to? Yes.
I'm bound by the waters of Spring Creek, the Flint River, and the Chattanooga River.
Then don't you know something magic has to happen in a place like that? That is a great and holy stage. And many wondrous things throughout time have happened in this place. Yes, sir.
I live on Swan Lake. And every morning I know I live on Swan Lake.
And the reason you know is
Because the
swans are there.
Make
Oh,
themselves pretty.
oh, how wonderful. Okay. Break. One of the greatest love stories from Ireland, we probably know this, is about a man who fell in love with a woman who had to be transformed into a swan every once in a while. And he was willing to be a swan with her. And that great love story, the great love person, Angus is his name. And he fell in love with a swan. And we have this huge tradition through Europe of the swan. And I also, because you mentioned that, and it reminded me of the Celts, we want to just, back to the power of now, back a little bit. This is a very potent time. And it's been true all over the world. For those of us in the northern hemisphere, the northern half of the world, this is a really delicate time, right now. It's very important to the Celts. And their term for it is Imbolc. And it's halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. So it's a turning. I have heard that the seeds, the cotton seeds, actually turn in the soil. Or it is a time for planting. It's a time for beginning the process of falling in love. Thank you for the swans. And all of that. And so you want to fall in love again at this time of year, in the springtime of the year as it comes forward. It's a time of lighting the lamps, of paying attention to the lights. So thank you. And this is a very precious time on this very precious earth. So that's our stage. The stage that you live on, the stage that you work in, all of it. And to pronounce it holy, to acknowledge that it is sacred, does something splendid to your heart. I promise. I want to get to the really tricky piece, okay? The next question is a really good, thorough, journalistic thing. Who, what, when, where, and how. Comes. How is a very important one. And in my sense of what the theater, the sacred theater of your life is about, there are three things that allow you to be the player. And the first is the power of expression. Full expression of who you are. And again, we go back to the verbs. We build a ladder or a structure of verbs, and then we add adverbs and other things to it. But I'm going to ask you, just for the joy of it, all right, to let something within you be willing to be expressed all at once. It may be weariness, you can yawn, you can cough, you can do anything you want to, but allow something that sits within you on this day to be expressed. And that means using your body as well. So it's your body, your face, your voice. But right now, just to think about it, would you stand? And let's have some expression. And you can turn to someone else and say what you want to express. And say good morning. the place you sit, all the things about your life that give you a point of view. And point of view is deeper than an opinion, okay? It's something that you don't shake easily. But when the time comes that you are being invited to change, something about your point of view shakes a bit, and you're being asked usually to widen it or to look deeper, to somehow shift the way you see the world, to look differently. And those of you who are working in communities, you know that your capacity to see as everyone in the community sees is part of your skill. One of the things that's absolutely essential is to know what the other members of the community feel, how they look at life, and what about that you need to embrace if you're going to effectively work with them. Is that accurate? That you need to be able to embrace someone else's point of view as a sacred actor, as a human being. Make sense? And that also means that it's very often very important for us to do the difficult work of change and to see things differently. Widen this perspective, deepen the perspective. That's the point of view. And the third great way, the how of living life as a great play, is conflict. Yes, here it for conflict. Now I'm talking about the power of conflict. I'm going to do the caveat first. And that is that if things have descended into violence, I'm not talking about violence. If things have descended into violence, then the point is, or part of the heartbreaking truth is, that the people have neglected to embrace the power of conflict. And the power of conflict has two aspects. One, it is absolutely sacred. It has three aspects. It is totally sacred, and it is an invitation to grow. Not just to change, but to grow. To grow. And the failure to do that sometimes will send us into a desire for violence or actual violence. But the soul, I believe, when conflict rises, is asking you to grow. And it is a holy task. And it is sometimes about the hardest thing there is. And the thing about conflict, my dear friends, there is no play without it. It is the one essential thing for a good play. It moves the story forward. And all of us have been caught in stories where we were stuck, we were lost, we were caught. We didn't know what to do. Well, somebody will come and say, well, why don't you do this? And you say, are you kidding me? Give me a break. You know, all of that stuff. But something's being asked to grow. When conflict rises. So I'm going to just ask you to embrace the power of it. Embrace the power of it. And think for just 1 second of the conflict in your life right now. And ask yourself, what's being asked to grow here? And sometimes, it was lovely in the play last night. Because what was being, the lady whose father and then her husband whammed her, what was being asked to grow in her, obviously, I mean, and the fact that he had descended to violence meant that he had not taken his own need to grow, but she was getting stronger, right? She finally said, stop, and she was, and because great conflict, of course, is within the person, she wanted to kill him, right? But she didn't. She reached for a greater source of growth. She reached for God. And that's one of the ways that we grow. Our relationship to God, our relationship to ourselves. We know more about ourselves if we honestly embrace the power of conflict. And remember what the caveat is? That does not mean violence, right? Violence is a failure of the embrace of the power. A failure to embrace the power. Okay. How am I doing for time? Somebody back there saying, stop.
About 10 minutes.
Okay. All right, so we come now to why. who, what, when, where, how, and why. And there are two answers to the why, and one is the sacred power of the audience. And what I include in the sacred audience are all who have gone before. And last night's beautiful thing with the lights and the calling of the names. I'm going to ask you once more to stand and call the name of an ancestor, a grandmother, a grandfather. If you know the names of anyone further back, just call their names. And we're going to have a light. I'm going to ask a light to come on in your heart for that person. If you have 16 you want to name it. But they are part of the sacred audience. And whatever their stories, I love it in the thing where my grandmother was an Indian chief. You know, you admit, you acknowledge the ones, you know, who were horse thieves. My personal favorite of one of my ancestors, and all the ones who were traitors and who lost. You honor them as well, because in changing the pattern, in acknowledging their story, something shifts for them. In addition to God smiling because the stories, they smile. They're released from the terrible imprisonment of our thoughts about them, our shame about them. One of the strongest places that I've ever worked in my life was in Australia, where the people today still carry the sense of having been a penal colony. In my memory of American history, that was also true in Georgia. Yes. But one of the most important things that the ancestral beings there in Australia actually said, please do not be ashamed. You want to remember that, you know, the story. You cannot be ashamed of the ancestors. So, will you, in your heart, light a memory and be grateful, because you're carrying the genetic structure of hundreds of thousands of people. And we go back about 5, maybe 6 generations, and everybody in this room is related. So we're all going to be having the same ancestors. We all have the same ancestors. So would you just, a grandmother, a grandfather, an uncle, anybody who's gone before, would you just stand and say their name and feel their light, live their life, live their life. No matter what they were, no matter how they suffered, live their life. This is your sacred audience.
Siblings and all the past.
Boston and Chapman.
Lily.
Rubin State. Holland.
And the other reason that we live our lives as sacred plays is to celebrate life. To say the great yes. And I want to acknowledge that if you can't think of an audience that you want to play your play for, then I say, I recommend God. Or life itself. This planet is an old woman now, according to planetologists. She should be long dead. And the reason she's not is because life is here. And we are part of that. We have the unbelievable privilege and joy to be life, to be alive. And that's what we want to celebrate. And we're here, part of the conference is the wondrous thing of honoring the earth. And I want to quote two people, because one is Mary Oliver, who says, look, I want to love the world. I want to love the world as though this is the last time. I want to love the world as though this was the last time that I'm ever going to be alive and know it. I want to love the world as though it is the last time I'm ever going to be alive and to know it. We are alive. We know it. That's how we love the world. We love it. And Hafez, that glorious Persian poet, says, "One regret, dear world, I am determined not to have when I'm lying on my deathbed, is that I did not kiss you enough." So we want to kiss everything about this earth, this precious earth, that we can. And I want to tell another. No, I'm not. I'm going to do something else instead. I'm going to read a poem by Hafez. That's all right. In honor of the arts, and in order to celebrate life, he has a wondrous poem called "Listen to This Music." I am a hole in a flute that the Christ's breath moves through. Listen to this music. I am the concert from the movement of every creature singing in myriad clouds, and every dancer, their foot I know and lift, and every brush and hand, well, that is me too, who caresses any canvas or cheek. How did I become all these things and beyond all things? It was my destiny, as it is yours. My poems are about our glorious journey. We are a hole in a flute, a moment in space, that the Christ's body can move through and sway all forms in an exquisite dance as the wind in the forest. And in the power of celebrating life, one of my favorite poems by W.S. Merwin. And it reminds us of one great scholar who said, if you don't know any other prayer, the prayer that works is thank you. So, and it's called Thanks by W.S. Merwin. Listen. With the night falling, we are saying thank you. We are stopping on the bridges to bow from the railings. We are running out of the glass rooms with our mouths full of food to look at the sky and say thank you. We are standing by the water, looking out in all different directions. Back from a series of hospitals, back from a mugging, after funerals, we are saying thank you. After the news of the dead, whether or not we knew them, we are saying thank you. Looking up from the tables, we are saying thank you. In a culture up to its chin in shame, living in the stench it has chosen, we are saying thank you. Over telephones, we are saying thank you. In doorways and in the backs of cars and in elevators, remembering wars and the police at the back door and the beatings on stairs, we are saying thank you. In the banks that use us, we are saying thank you. With the crooks in office, with the rich and fashionable unchanged, we go on saying thank you, thank you. With the animals dying around us, our lost feelings, we are saying thank you. With the forest falling faster than the minutes of our lives, we are saying thank you. With the words going out like cells of a brain, with the cities growing over us like the earth, we are saying thank you faster and faster. With nobody listening, we are saying thank you. We are saying thank you and waving, dark though it is.